Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois. And we have got a great show for you today. Ken and I are going to be sitting down and chatting about seed starting. It is all the rage right now, and we'll tell you why. But you know, I'm not doing this by myself. I'm joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. You got your seed started?
Absolutely not. The fact that the season is starting a few weeks earlier is not helping either. So I am sitting back and enjoying coming home late from work or whatever event my children are doing, and thinking wistfully as I drift off to sleep about starting seeds, and then waking up and just keeping that vicious cycle going again. How about yourself?
We've got some started. We're a little behind. And usually a lot of times kind of jump the ball and things get too big. And now I've kind of pendulum swung too far in the other direction. I'm going to be too late for some stuff, but it's all good.
That's fine. You know, we're looking at possibly a very long growing season this year, so maybe we will have some extra time. If it's warm like this at the beginning of the season, maybe at the end of the season we're going to have another warm spell. We'll see what happens. But
This,
yeah, I'm glad to hear you got started.
this is going to be there. We have a late frost and a very early frost.
Watch that happen. Yes, and no peaches to speak of. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Um, And because we're talking about seed starting, I wanted to share. Last week we talked about garden trends, and I wanted to share from this publication. So this publication is from the green industry, landscapers, garden centers. It's from their own metrics, and so I wanted to share what they're seeing in the social media sphere. So let me read this to you right now. So searches for seed starting is up 300% right now in 2024. The same search for seed starting indoors also up 300%. The question, when to start seed indoors, up 700%. And then starting seeds indoors up 300%. So every combination of starting seeds, people are curious about this. And so they're seeing a real big uptick on seed starting sales of materials at their garden centers.
So just compared to like last year, does it say?
Do, 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 do. I think just in the month. So it is up 300% since last February, or since this previous
So
February.
February. Okay.
So March it has jumped. So they're going kind of on an annual cycle, looking month to month how these searches have increased. And so we could probably say that this increase or this interest um, should be expected. A lot of people like to start seeds, but they are saying that they're seeing increased sales in these things at garden centers than normal. So I'm supposing that's a normal from other years past. And if you want to know about what people are searching on Pinterest for starting seeds, the specific plants, we have snapdragons and cut flowers. So foxglove, gladiolus, and ranunculus are all popular searches. So seed starting is tis the season right now, in mid-March as we're recording this. So I think for the most part, can we might focus mostly on vegetable seeds today, vegetable crops. What do you think?
Yeah, we can throw some flowers in here and there. But yeah, I would say for us, we usually do vegetables. We do some flowers, snapdragons, zinnias, and stuff. I think a lot of at least the flowers that we grow in our house, we start a lot of them inside, but you can also direct seed. We just try to get a jump on the season.
Yeah. Yeah, I think coming into the show today, my mindset was mostly vegetables. That's what I was thinking of, getting tomato plants started and peppers and all of that. But it seems like lots of folks are very interested in cut flower gardens this year too. So I think a lot of what we talk about um, can be applied to other aspects of seed starting, different flowering plants and the like. So Yeah, I guess we should get started. So, Ken, why in the heck do we want to start from seed? I always tell people this is not easy. Why do people want to do this?
I think, well, I mean, for personal experience, for me personally, I think kind of two things. You get a jump start on the growing season. There's certain things that we're talking about vegetable gardens. You're not growing tomatoes direct seeded. Um, if you're lucky, you may get a crop right before it freezes. So you're getting that jump start. You're putting out those transplants so you save yourself, maybe a month or more of time there. And I think for me, the big thing is the variety. There's a lot more varieties of cultivars that you can buy, start by seed, than you can if you're just going to go to the nursery or box store. Um, and I think we're seeing more varieties cultivars, especially for like tomatoes and stuff in stores, but it's still nowhere near what you're going to find in like a garden catalog. There's some of them that have 10 pages devoted just to tomatoes. There's a whole company that's all they do is sell tomato seeds. So there's a lot more diversity cultivars. If we're talking about tomatoes, different colors, sizes, shapes. You've got your slicers, your beef steak, your paste, your um, grape types, your cherry tomatoes. There's just endless possibilities almost when
Yeah.
doing seed.
And I usually forewarn people. I say if you're gardening for the first time this year, maybe you just bought a house and you're just going to put in a garden, baby seed starting isn't for you this year. Go to the store, buy some transplants, um, because when you're seed starting, I meet a lot of failure sometimes. Sometimes I don't get good germination. Sometimes I get diseases. Sometimes, um, like you said, they maybe my lighting's not good. We're going to talk about all that. But if this is your first year, I suggest buying transplants from the store just because we want you to have a positive experience with gardening. And sometimes seed starting isn't positive. We run into problems.
Yeah, and sometimes going through those garden catalogs, you get paralysis through analysis. There's just so much to pick from. It can get overwhelming if you don't have an idea of what you're looking for, too.
Right. Well, and I'm the opposite of that story too. I am it's not paralysis, it's a I can do that. Oh, I could probably fit that one in my garden. Oh, I could do that. I can do that. I wind up with way too much than what I can actually put in my yard. So I feel like those seed catalogs give me false hope of what is achievable in a growing season. So yeah, go to the garden center this spring if it's your first time, get those transplants picked out, get them in the garden, and learn to grow the plants first before starting from seed.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about vegetables mostly, but if like, we talk about tomatoes, all the varieties. So we do a lot of snapdragons, and that's another one. At the store you may be seeing three or four different types, but I think this year we had our daughter help us pick stuff out, and she obviously wanted every snapdragon there was. But I think we've got like 10 different types of snapdragons we're starting.
Mhm.
So, and that's still just a drop in the bucket of what is out there too, different colors and sizes and this, that, and the other. So it's not only for vegetables, that's ridiculous amount of diversity. It's for flowers too.
Yeah. And also that's kind of brings a good point up, Ken. I suppose with some flowering plants, if this is your first foray into seed starting, I will say marigolds are pretty easy to start from seed. So if you want to maybe buy a couple some of the materials, some of the lighting, like get a shelf set up, but you don't want to hinge everything, like you don't want to hinge your whole vegetable garden on this, try some marigolds. Try starting some sunflowers even from seed. Those can transplant. So this experiment with the low bar plants. Yeah,
Yeah.
set your expectations very low. I
Well, and
feel
some
like
of
I'm
those
talking to
flowers,
clouds.
and some of those flowers, like the marigolds, the sunflowers, the zinnias, you can direct seed those too. So hold some of that seed back, and if it's complete failure inside, you can just go direct seed that. Or for marigolds, you can go buy some at the hardware store if nothing else.
Mhm. So, Ken, I guess we should chat about. So, let's say a person has decided to start seeds in their own home. Where should they do this? I feel like we all start on a windowsill at the beginning. I know I have as a broke college student who rented, but I wanted to start seeds. I literally put like a little tray on like the toilet tank, and there was a window there, and I got some light. It didn't go so well. So, do we have any tips for where should we be doing this in the house?
Yeah, so windowsill you can try. If you're gonna be doing windowsill, you probably want southern exposure. It's gonna get your most light. And as we get later or further into spring, you're gonna get better and better light. The sun's gonna get higher in the sky, more intense. But early in the year, you're not gonna be getting enough light, even if it's southern exposure. So you're gonna have to look at supplemental lighting, whether that's nowadays it can be fluorescent or more and more LED lighting. Is kind of the way things are going. I know I was going to buy some lights for the office so we can start some more ginger. And the bank we had bought last year, company isn't carrying anymore. They're switching everything over to LED. So we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, Ken, I think windowsill works in a pinch, especially if you're doing something like lettuces or some greens, herbs, things like that. But our fruiting crops, boy, they need a lot of light. And so investing in supplemental lighting, probably going to be the way we'll need to go. I mean, days are getting longer now, but they're still not June 21st long. You know, we're not that long of a day length. So yeah, I would say for me, where I now start seeds is in my basement. Um, and I do that because I feel like the temperature is a bit more stable there. I have a little bit more control over some of the kind of environmental aspects of that, airflow, temperature, light. And so I actually start my seeds in a place where there are no windows now in the basement. And I depend entirely on artificial lighting to get my seedlings off to a good start.
Yeah, our seed starting rack is in our dining room. So, and it's slowly being we're taking more and more plants and just leaving them under there year round or in the
Mhm.
winter. So we're losing some of our seed starting space. But yeah, and like anything else with gardening, you can spend as much money as you possibly want on seed starting. You can buy pre-made racks that can cost you $1,000. If you're getting one that's got 3 or 4 shelves on it and LED lights and all the other bells and whistles. Or if you got it in your windowsill, you can get a small light, even a fluorescent light and a lamp if it's a small enough area, and do that. So it's your budget's kind of your only limitation when it comes to
Yeah.
the bells and whistles you want to get.
And I think also it kind of depends upon the crop that you're going to be starting. So this year I am going to experiment in my garage with some of the cooler season crops, some of the lettuces, kale, things like that that I will be starting. And so we have some shelving in the garage where even though it's still kind of chilly out there, I can probably get a heat mat under there, set that on a timer, and I'm gonna have some domes then over top of that flat. I'm really gonna have to watch that temperature probably pretty closely. If we get another really cold night, probably have to move those into the house. But if it also gets really warm in that garage, which it can, some of our 70-degree days that we've had recently, it's gotten pretty warm in there. I'll just have to keep a closer eye on that temperature. But for my warm season crops, tomatoes and peppers and then the like, those are going to still probably be germinated in the basement, again, where I'm not going to have big swings in temperature from cold to hot throughout the day.
Yeah, I've never tried lettuce seed starting. I've always done a direct seed. I may have to try that one
I
of these
I
days.
was the head lettuce. I really like doing those pre or sprouting those or germinating those in flats or in cells and then transplanting them out. Um, and that's how I've done it. But yes, you can also for those sprinkle those in the ground and just direct sow them.
So maybe another one to experiment with. That I think lettuce is pretty forgiving if
Yeah.
you have less light too.
Hmm. Yeah.
So talked about where to do it. a little bit about lighting. We could probably go into a little more of that a little bit,
Mhm.
but what other materials should we be pursuing on our seed starting journey?
Well, I would say like you could go to the store and you can buy like a kit that has everything you need these days. That seems to be the most popular thing anymore, especially in the gardening world. No matter what it is you're thinking of doing, like, oh, you can buy a kit now, whether it's seed starting or irrigation or what have you. It comes with everything you need. And so some of these kits, it will come with like a flat, and by flat, we're talking like a 1020. That's the industry term, 1020 flat like this. This one doesn't have holes in the bottom, but ideally, you want to make sure that you have drainage, and this one would be something to set underneath maybe a flat or other smaller containers that do have drainage to make sure that you can drain water away and that your seeds aren't sitting in water all the time. Otherwise, they'll rot. They won't germinate. And in that flat of with no drainage, you would then you have kind of the world as your oyster in terms of what containers you can use. I have some really cute ones. So this is actually a cute, colorful, comes in all different colors. This one has drainage holes. This one doesn't. These are just little like 4x4 squares. And then they fit perfectly arranged in the flat. Um, Now you could put soil in here, put seeds in here and get them started. This is actually what this is intended for is microgreens. And so this is a little fiber mat right here that we would set in here, and you would sprinkle microgreen seeds and just mist that down, throw it in the flat, and yeah, so there's that. But then, I mean, I think a lot of us are kind of reaching for what we have on hand from last year. So we do have some of these like containers where you could fill with soil and start seed in there. I would caution if you're doing that, it's always a good idea to clean those before seed starting, especially if you've had any disease issues in the past. Get them in a Put them in a big tub with some Dawn dish soap, and we clean them, hose them off. If you're doing this commercially, you would do some type of a sanitation rinse as well. But you don't necessarily need to do that at home unless you've been experiencing disease problems.
Say a lot of the kits are usually going to come with these little like, 6-pack cells.
Mhm.
So there'd be like 72, right? 72 in a flat. You get that? Is that right?
Could be, yeah. That's
Something like
one
that.
of the numbers it could be.
Yeah, depending on the size. So a lot of the kits you're going to buy the all-in-one where it's got the tray, the cells, and the dome. It's going to be this size. If you're watching,
Yes.
if you're just
I
listening, that
Sorry.
wasn't very helpful.
No, it wasn't. So yeah, if you're just listening, I guess we're doing a lot of show and tell today. So we do have the YouTube link in the show notes if you want to check out what we're showing.
Yeah, but I guess if you've ever gone to the nursery garden center, if you get a 6-pack of plants, those little usually black plastic cells is what those kits are typically going to come with.
Mhm.
A little more
And
descriptive.
yes, I also get the question often, like, do we need to have like the humidity dome over top the germinating seed? Um, I kind of go back and forth. I think it's more of your environment. Is your house like super dry? Is it really going to dry out very quickly? Um, I think there's other things to consider, but what do you think, Ken, when it comes to those humidity domes?
If I have them and have them that'll fit on my containers, I use them. But as soon as stuff starts poking through, I'll crack them because those things are coming up and you basically got 100% humidity in there, and that's what they're used to. I think sometimes if you just take that off right away, and your house humidity is at 30%, plants are going to be particularly happy. So I usually crack it for a day or two, let that equalize, and then take it off. I don't leave them on too long after stuff starts popping up.
That's a great tip. I had never actually thought about that acclimation period between 100% humidity to 30% humidity. That explains a lot of issues I've had in the past. Okay, very
So
good. All right.
I don't know if that actually works, but it works in my head. We'll put it that way.
Hey, tips for free here, folks. That's I'll take them. I'll take them. Oh, that's a good one. So yeah, humidity domes, they often do have the little vents that you can control a little bit of that airflow. I don't know how well it works. Um, but yeah, I like that. Crack them. And then once you really start to see good germination, I usually take mine off. Um, and then I do you use any fans, Ken? I use fans in my basement where I'm germinating seed to get some airflow.
We don't. We've got ours in our dining room, so we've got people moving around a lot, and it's on a wall, and then we have a door to get into the house right on the other side of that wall. So when that's open, I think we're getting enough airflow. We haven't really had any issues with some of the diseases and stuff that you would associate with. Um, but that would help with drying out and helps. I think that air movement helps kind of stiffen those stems too. So that would probably something we should do, but we don't.
Well, just encourage the kids to keep running in the
Yeah,
dining
blow on them every time they go by.
room. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I have so after I see germination, I take the lid, the germination dome off. I remove that. And then so my timer, so everything's on a timer and it's all plugged into a power strip, which is safe enough. If you have a really big setup, you might need to have multiple timers and multiple power strips. Don't do was the Christmas Vacation Clark Griswold thing where he plugs all of his Christmas lights into one outlet. Don't do that. Um, but so it's all so once the timer kicks on, the lights kick on, and the fan kicks on too. Um, but there's one thing when it comes to before we get things germinated here is heat mats. Do you use heat mats?
I don't, but it's upstairs, so I mean we keep our house. No, we probably cooler than what some of the season. We're usually mid 60s, so I'm not too concerned with it being too cold. But yeah, someone like you is in a basement. It's probably a little more important.
Yeah. So, and I do use heat mats, and so I use a relatively cheaper heat mat. Basically, you plug it in, and what it does is it increases the temperature like 20 degrees beyond what the ambient air temperature that you could kind of expect anywhere from like 15 to 25 ish. We'll say 20 degrees on average. So it increases that about 20 degrees, whatever the ambient air temperature is. Uh, there's not much control. You can buy heat mats where you actually have a thermometer and you stick that thermometer in the soil media that you're germinating your seed in, and it will regulate the temperature to stay at like 70 to 85-ish degrees. And it sort of does depend upon your seed that you're using to know what is that ideal germination temperature. A lot of times your seed packets will tell you what that ideal germination temperature is. So it's heat mats do a great job. They work really well for breaking that seed dormancy, getting germination. But it is very important as soon as we get root development, those heat mats can actually cook or kind of overheat those roots. And so once you see germination, it's important to unplug or turn off that heat mat and get that out of the equation so that you don't overheat your plants as they're growing.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, and I would say if you're in a basement, depending on how well insulated everything is, you probably want to look at a heat mat, or especially if you're doing warm season stuff, because that needs warmer temperatures to really germinate well.
Yeah, yeah. In an ideal world, yeah, our warm season crops they'd be going into the ground during the summer months when they would germinate the best. But as Ken said, then we wouldn't get any vegetables because it would take too long to grow. And yeah, it'd be freezing cold by the time they started flowering.
All right. So then we've talked about lights, fluorescent LED lighting. Um, but I think one thing people overlook, especially when they're starting, is the distance of the lights to the plants. I think a lot of times people have them up way too high, and usually you want them within a couple inches of those leaves. And for our seed starting setup, we've got them on pulleys so that we can pulley on each corner of our lights, so we can angle them. So if you've got stuff that's a lot taller, we can raise that up and keep it lower on the other side. And so we can try to keep those lights close, but not touching, because you will get leaves burned even if you're using LEDs.
Yeah, and we're trying our best to replicate the intensity of the sun, but we just can't do that in our house. Sun is bright and is very powerful. But so we're doing our best by lowering those lights closer to the tops of your seedlings. You're going to at least increase that intensity that their seedlings are receiving there. That does unfortunately limit the kind of the width or the area that that light touches. So oftentimes, if you're lowering your light, you might even need to add a second fixture, a light fixture, if your lower light that's lower down towards your seedlings is not covering all of your shelving. So just be mindful of that. That happens to me, and unfortunately, I just have to rotate flats under the more intense light in that case.
Yeah, usually my plants on the end are all
Mhm.
angled.
Angling towards the light, yeah. And it's that's an interesting feature. You can even go to like the garden center and you can see when you look at the flats that are on the bench for you to purchase, you can see the plants usually at the edges of that flat are a little bit taller. That's because they're probably grown under maybe artificial light at some point, and they had to grow a little bit taller to reach that light. Whereas the ones in the center, sometimes they're shorter because they were right underneath that light. Now that can also be the inverse. That can be flipped. Sometimes the plants in the middle, they weren't getting enough light, and they are a little bit taller and leggier than the plants on the edge. So I always look at flats closely when I'm purchasing transplants, and I'm like, I always pick the shorter, stockier ones when I'm going to buy stuff.
Yes, that's always a good thing to do. But but the only thing you can get away with lanky plants is will easily get away with is tomatoes. And
Yeah.
even then they have their limits as to how lanky you want
Yep. Yeah. They split easily if they're too lanky, fall over and crack. Yeah. I I'll also add, so I we have our fluorescent bulb light fixture, but we also have two different types of LED fixtures. One is the blue and red uh, light, which I don't like as much. Makes your plants look a weird color. You can't really tell if they're green or purple or red, or you don't know what color the leaves are. So you got to turn off the artificial lighting and use an actual, real lighting, uh, or a white light or blue, not, or a white light or a warm light to see if it's the leaves are green or are they a sickly yellow. You don't know.
You
Um,
also get special glasses.
yes, they have the special glasses that cut out some of those light waves. But I will say for your LED fixtures, read those instructions carefully in terms of how high to hang them above your plants. I've noticed that they vary depending upon the company. Um, some of them are suggesting to keep them a little bit higher, and so I would just make sure to read those instructions on those LED fixtures because that's kind of a brave new world in terms of plant artificial lighting.
Yeah, I think the LED lighting I've been seeing more and more nowadays is more the white. It may have some red and blue bulbs, whatever
Mhm,
they're called in there too, diodes, I guess. But it's more white. So you don't have those kind of messed up colors. The first bank of LEDs we got were the blue and red, which makes everything look pink. Yeah, you go in the room, you can't see anything. And then when you walk out, everything looks green for a little bit. So we did get the glasses. Just when our kids go in there, it doesn't, at least I hope it doesn't permanently mess up your eyesight. It's just kind of temporary. Everything's got a greenish tinge to it.
mhm. It's funny how light physics works. Yeah. So Ken, I did mention I have everything on a timer. So my timer, it's a digital timer, and there's a couple different types that you can get. But I will say my timer, it pretty much controls the lights. That is my overarching goal is to control the lights. Yes, they'll also kick on the fan. Yes, they'll also kick on the heat mats if I have them going. Um, but in terms of how long should the lights be on or how long should that timer be set, what are the recommended duration for artificial lighting for some of our seedlings?
I think, what do we have ours set at? I think we've got ours set for like 14, 15 hours. Usually you're going to leave it on a little longer than, well, longer than you would have like a normal day length, just because that light isn't as intense. So you're getting more light onto those. But I think usually 14, 15 hours,
Hmm.
maybe 16 is what you're looking at.
Yeah. I think mine is set to 14. No, wait. Mine is set to 16 hours. So it kicks on at 6 a.m. and it kicks off at 8 p.m. I have to pay more attention. I don't know. I can't remember. But
So
yeah.
I think ours is 7 to 10.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, maybe 14 hours for me. Essentially, a lot of these plants could grow well with 12-hour day length, but 12-hour day length is the sun. And like we said, we try hard, but we cannot replicate that intensity of the sun. So that's why we have to really set those timers for like 14, 16 hours indoors to give our plants a little bit extra light, supplement that the lack of sunlight that they're actually getting.
And if you have Christmas lights, you put on a timer. Just recycle that and don't have to go out and get a new one unless you keep your Christmas lights up year round.
I know some people that do that. It's Christmas every day of the year.
Yes.
Look, Ken, we talked about some of the materials that we need, containers and things like that, but maybe the most important material, the media or the soil that we sprout our seeds in. Um, and there's been quite a bit of debate or issue about this. Um, now, I will just say that when it comes to seed starting, for the most part, we were using a soil-free mix. There's no actual soil in these. This artificial media or artificial mix. And so even if we might say soil during the rest of the show, just know we're probably talking about a soil-free mix. Um, but most of these soil-free mixes are comprised of peat. Um, there's other soil-free mixes that are comprised of coconut coir. I can't say that word. Coconut coir. Um, so that they're kind of the bulk of that material, the either the peat moss or the coconut coir that makes up the bulk of that material. I just sandwiched that sentence. Yeah, I said the same thing at the beginning as I did at the end. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So well, at least as long as I've been doing seed starting, it's been peat. And I think there's some legitimate concerns about using peat. While it is a somewhat renewable resource, it doesn't renew as quickly as we're using it. So that's mined from peat bogs and stuff. And then usually, especially if you're a seed starting, that's milled up really fine. And then you're planting into that. I think you're seeing more coconut coir. I guess that's maybe a little more sustainable, but they're also deforesting jungles in Asia to plant
Mhm.
coconuts. So I don't know how how much better it is if it is better. So I think those are the two you're typically going to find. Usually you'll have stuff a lot of times, sometimes perlite, vermiculite mixed in there. I've seen stuff with compost as a base with some of these other things mixed in there. So there's a lot of variability. I usually use the peat stuff. We do have we have gotten some stuff this year that's got some compost in it. Um, and I don't, and this is kind of my personal thoughts on this. I don't really think you need stuff that's really got a whole lot of nutrients in it. So like you don't really necessarily need something that's got a lot of compost because you kind of want those roots to really search out that media, get that really healthy root system going. And if you've got really nice kind of lush media, I don't know how much your roots are really going to be searching
Mhm.
on stuff. So I don't know. I don't know. There's probably research done on it, and I haven't looked at it, and maybe I'm just blowing smoke. But that's in my mind, that's the way it works.
Well, and a lot of that nutrients will leach out over time. If you're watering the seeds before they've germinated, the nutrients are still moving downward into that cell or that container, whatever it is they're in, and then they leak out in the bottom tray. And so, yeah, I think you don't necessarily want a superfood kind of fertilizer in there because we'll talk about this later. You'll be feeding things other than your plants. So
Everything else.
there's other things that'll be growing in there too, but we'll talk about that. Yeah. I just also just from my bird's eye view of the peat moss, what I have heard is that I know there's a lot of emotions about peat moss. And there's especially with the way that over in Europe, how they have handled harvesting and using peat over there, definitely been destructive. Um, what most of us use here in the US is harvested up in Canada. A lot of those bags are going to have a Canadian flag on them. So from what I've been told, they're very proud of how they handle their sourcing and harvesting of peat from their peat bogs up in Canada. But as Ken said, we're going to keep using it and it's going to renew after a couple hundred years. So yeah, maybe that coconut coir is going to be something that can help balance us out a little bit more for the long haul.
Yeah, and I'll say for seed starting, regardless if you're doing the peat, the coir, however you pronounce it, compost based, you want to make sure that's fairly fine. Um, Particularly if you're doing like small seeded stuff. So if you're doing things like snapdragons or poppies, so these have these really small seeds. You don't necessarily want those big chunks of things in there because it's hard to kind of get that good contact where you get end up with these big voids that your seeds fall down in and they're really small. So I spend a lot of time, more time than I really want to, picking out sticks and sometimes rocks and stuff from these mixes. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So, Ken, to poorly quote from the graduate, the future is plastic. And we just so happen to be in the future now, according to that movie's time frame. So, I mean, plastic is great. It can be molded into any shape. It's lightweight. It can be used for multiple seasons. But plastic also has a disposal or issue or end of life issue, and that it doesn't really necessarily decompose into its original building blocks and go back out into the environment and then can be reconstituted into something else. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. And especially when it comes to like the green industry and pots, a lot of that plastic is not recyclable. So there is this movement to maybe get a bit away from plastics. And you have worked in this and using fewer plastics, and you have a technique that you use to start seeds. So share that with us. What are you doing to maybe lessen some of that plastic waste?
Yeah. So this year, so this is the first year we've done it. We've gotten some soil blockers. So basically, for this one, for people who aren't watching the video, it's just kind of this metal device. It's got little chambers in it. You pack in your potting media in there. It's got a little plunger. You plunge that, and out pops a block of soil. So I've got two different sizes. There's a couple other sizes too. So I have a one that's really small. These make these little, about an inch and a half little plugs. Um, and the plunger's got a little dibbler on there. So you have this little divot in the top that you place your seed on, and then you can cover. So the little one I have, we also have a larger soil blocker, and it's got these little squares in there. They're the same size as the small ones. So we can take the smaller ones and bump them up into a bigger soil block. So it's going to look, so we started some asparagus back in February. And this is kind of what it looks like there. So we've got this block, and we did the asparagus. The seeds are probably a little too big for the little one, but we started them in these little blocks and then bumped them up to the bigger one. And this is some asparagus in a block.
Ken,
And
that's
then,
not asparagus.
or not asparagus, artichoke, sorry.
There you go.
Artichoke. So we got artichoke in the block here. And these artichokes and these cells were started at the same time. And you kind of see difference there. The block is quite a bit bigger. It does have more media to grow in. Nice thing about this is that when the soil blocks, is that when the roots hit it, um, it's kind of pruning itself, air pruning. So I'm not having a bunch of those circling roots and stuff on there quite yet. So we're experimenting with that so far. So good. The bigger blocks do take a little more room than the kind of the 6-pack cells. So we've run into a few space issues. So we're kind of being a little bit selective this year about what we put in the soil blocks and what we use our our traditional um, plastic cells with.
So yeah, as Ken described, between each block, you have a gap, like there's an air gap between the two, which then
Yeah.
air prunes and gives you a more fibrous type root system. Um,
I
oh,
will
that's so
say for these big ones, when we put them in the tray, we kind of smush them together. So now they've all knitted together. But I took a knife and cut this one out, and it's fine. It's still good. So lesson for next year is not leave a little more space so they don't all grow together. But
ah,
yeah, we're so far, I'm happy with it. I think it should be pretty easy to transplant these and can report back later to see if we get any artichokes because we're
mhm,
currently doing the vernalization on it where it needs 50 degrees for a couple weeks in order to get flower formation in that first year.
mhm. Well, very neat. And what kind of soil is used for that? Is that potting
Um,
mix?
so it's a potting mix. This is the one that's got some compost in it. I haven't tried it with just straight peat or coir, but from what I read, that compost helps those blocks stay together a little bit better. Because if you don't pack them in very well, um, it'll crumble.
Mhm,
It's taken some trial and error. One drawback with this little one, so the bigger
mhm,
one is all metal. It's pretty sturdy. It's welded together. This plastic one, the bottom that's kind of forming those cells is plastic, and this metal, the rest of it's metal just kind of clips into there. So there's been several times where we've packed it in real tight, and it's all popped apart. So
mhm,
if I could do it again, if I could find a small one like this is what 4x5, I think again inch and a half. If I could find one that's all metal, that's welded and doesn't pop apart, I would do that. I don't know if it exists, but that is one issue we've had because if you get them too loose, they'll just crumble. So little little trial and error on that.
mhm. And if people are wondering what these, again, Ken described them, but I look at these and they look like over the top brass knuckles with springs on them. So that's what I'm seeing as Ken's holding these up, and it looks like he's got these giant brass knuckles with like springs and hydraulics on them. So yeah, pretty
And
sturdy.
and for these, there's a size in between this two, which we probably should get. Because sometimes the seeds are almost too big for the small one. Having a kind of a middle size would probably be beneficial. That may be next year.
Next year. That's right. Mhm. But there's more than just soil blocking. There's another way to cut out plastic. So what's your other technique that you use?
So we also got things like the peat pots, or cow pots, and sometimes when you go to the garden center nursery, you can buy plants that are already in these. A lot of times, like the herbs and stuff, will be in these usually round pots. But same thing here. It's kind of compressed peat or cow patties sometimes. Um, Now, in my experience, I haven't used these a tremendous amount for seed starting. Um, but when I have bought plants used out of these and put them in the ground, they don't break down. At least I haven't had them break down like advertised. Um, go in, clean up the garden in the fall or even the next spring, pull the plant out, and a lot of times that pot, you can still see it.
Mhm.
So I don't use them all that much just because I haven't seen them break down like they've said. But maybe it's just me. I mean, when you do use these, if you put them in the ground, you want to make sure you peel off the top. Because if you've got that top sticking out, that'll wick the water out. So make sure that peat pot or the cow pot is completely buried when using those.
Yeah. I've found with the peat pots that well, and same is true with the peat soil mix, that if you allow it to dry out, that it actually becomes a little bit hydrophobic in that it won't absorb water unless you keep it soaking in water for a long period of time. And so those peat pots, as they dry over time, either in the ground or in my basement, um, and I let them dry out too much, they actually start to repel water and then they don't break down. But the ones that I maybe keep a little bit too wet, maybe they're sitting in water all the time, they'll break down fairly quickly. And I really do like the cow pots, mostly because I'll take them into like a classroom or something. I'll hand them all out to the kids and I'll say, guess what you're holding? Cow poop. And yeah, like, oh, they're gross. It's like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
You never get invited back.
That's right. I'm doing that. My job, one classroom at a time. Yeah.
And speaking of drying out, going back to the soil blocks, I found that the soil blocks dry out a little faster, which when you think about it makes sense. It's completely exposed to the air compared to those plastic where you only have the top. So if you do
Yeah.
the blocking, you may need to water or keep an eye on the water a little more
Mhm.
than you normally would.
Oh, okay. So how do you water, Ken? Because with soil blocking, when I've done in the past, I've had to use like a mist. I've had a hose set up with like a mist nozzle on it, which is able to kind of permeate all of the different soil blocks, like the corners and edges and down below. Um, but how do you water your stuff at home?
So we've got them in a tray,
Hmm.
and I just bottom water, so I dump the water in there. And with the really little ones, if they dry out, start floating, um,
Hmm.
and they'll get mixed up, and you don't know what's what anymore. And if you're not careful and you dump the water directly on the little ones, they wash away. So
Oh no.
there's been a little trial and error, but I think we've got down. We kind of leave gaps on the edges, so we're in the middle, so we've got area where we can pour water in.
Hmm.
Or we just let it bottom water.
Yeah.
Because one thing we do is when I do seeds, I top everything with vermiculite. Um, we can get into that a little bit later as to why I do that.
Mhm.
But sometimes if that dries out and you start misting, it all blows away
Yes.
and stuff too. So yeah,
And
I try to bottom water as much as I can.
that's the case for whether you're doing soil blocking or just in a regular 6 pack. Um, yeah, if you hit that with too hard of water, it's going to dislodge all the soil and you might wash your seeds out of there. So there's a couple gentle nozzle, like kind of rain-like nozzles that you could use on a watering can. But yeah, essentially, or bottom watering, I think those are great strategies so that the seed stays in place and doesn't wash off or get maybe buried a little bit too deep if you put too much water on top.
Yep. And I've got one other way. Now I bought this for demonstration in the office, and I've never actually used these to grow anything with. But paper pot maker. So you can make your own, you get newspaper, something like that. Basically, you've got a base, a wooden base. That's got a little bump in the bottom there. You wrap your paper around the pestle, right? Or is this the mortar? Which one's which? Mortar and pestle.
The thing that crushes stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a mortar and
Whichever,
pestle.
whichever one that is. But you wrap your paper around that. You put it in here, and then it kind of squishes the bottom. You make a little pot. So I think the instructions for this paper is too small, but you get a 12-inch sheet of paper, wrap it, and then you leave an inch or so gap at the bottom. You wrap that around there. Ideally, you'd want to do it a couple times to make it a little sturdier. And you'd use newspaper, not notebook paper. So this is for demonstration purposes only.
Mhm.
And then you kind of fold that up a little bit on the bottom. And then we put that in there. It's got that little lip. Put it in, crush it, and that kind of holds it all together.
Paper pot.
So paper pot, if you're going to be doing dozens, hundreds of plants, probably not the way to go, unless you got a lot of time or you get the whole family involved. But if
Mhm.
you're doing a few plants here and there, it could be an option.
Yeah. It's a fun. There's another one that kids really like to do. I think they really like to make the paper pots. So yeah, it's a cool tool. I know people have used like glass bottles, things like that, to help shape the larger size pots, maybe, or and using the similar technique as Ken, but what he just demonstrated there, much easier than taking a wine bottle and trying to make a pot out of it with paper.
Yeah, another thing I've seen people do is egg cartons. You use your cardboard ones, not your styrofoam, but you can use egg cartons. They'd be kind of similar to your peat pots. Probably not going to break down as fast, but maybe another easy option you probably may already have laying around the house.
Done that before. Yeah. In a pinch, got nothing else to use. Egg cartons it is.
Yeah, I mean I've seen we're trying to avoid plastic, but I've seen deli containers, people just poke holes in those and broadcast the seeds. Sometimes that gets a little tricky because then you got to start teasing out seedlings to use, and roots get all intertwined, and that can become a mess. But you know, that's an option. You don't necessarily have to go out and buy special containers as long as you've got drainage, as long as whatever you're using can drain.
Yep. Yep. That's the key. Well, speaking of drainage and issues that might arise from seed starting, let's talk about issues that might arise when you're starting seeds. And I will say maybe the first one that's easy for us to talk about, because we kind of already have, is leggy plants. So plants that are growing that are a little bit too tall. So leggy is the term we use when as leaves come out on a stem, there's usually a set distance between those two, and as there's less light, that distance expands and extends, and it gets longer and longer, and pretty soon you get a plant that's really tall and it doesn't have much strength to hold itself up, and it can flop over and break, um, and become susceptible to other problems. So leggy plants is commonly seen if plants are too crowded, or essentially there's just not enough light getting to them, and they're competing for those light resources. Um, Usually we can address them by, again, supplemental lighting, getting plants outside as soon as possible, into the sunlight. Um, so yeah, leggy plants is something I probably deal with more often than I should. So that must mean I need to buy more lights.
Yeah, more lights, put them lower, longer, leave your lights on a little bit longer. There's a couple ways you can potentially address that.
Yeah. And so what about though, because you can really run into some issues with disease when it comes to seed starting. Um, and then one kind of disease that stands out in my mind that really was hammered home, at least in school, was called damping off. Because that's one where the disease can actually carry over in the container that you used last year, and it can just show up again this year. So Ken, in terms of damping off, what are we looking at when we see a seedling suddenly succumb to this disease?
Yeah, so damping off is caused by a fungus-like organism, usually called a fungus, but it's not technically a fungus. Um, and with that, you kind of your seedlings come up, they look great, and all of a sudden they just kind of flop over. And usually, if you look at kind of near the soil or where they meet the potting mix, usually it's kind of constricted, narrowed, and discolored, and that's usually a pretty good indication you've got damping off. So that pathogen has attacked the roots and gotten into the stem, and your plants will just flop over, and you may have one, and then it'll slowly start spreading out because it'll move in the water, uh, and stuff. So that's probably the main reason why if you're reusing pots or cells, you want to watch, especially if you've had that. And if you've had that in the past, you may want to consider just getting new cells, and starting over. So that's the primary reason why you're going to be cleaning, sanitizing, is to prevent that. And that can, if you get that moving in, that can wipe out your plants, pretty quick. But once they get big, once they start getting some of those true leaves, um, your seedlings are kind of out of that susceptible stage. It's usually when they're young, have the cotyledons, maybe the first true set of leaves. But once they start getting bigger, they kind of grow out of it, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think they're able to maybe photosynthesize, get enough of a energy built up from those photosynthesis leaves, and be able to maybe outgrow some of that damage in the root system. And so, yeah, damping off, it's been an issue for me.
And keeping your soils too wet, can lead to that. So if it's your soil potting media is constantly kind of that waterlogged, that's really good conditions for it. Your plants then get stressed because they can't get enough oxygen to the roots, and that makes them a little more susceptible too. So watch the watering, make sure you're cleaning and sanitizing well if you're reusing stuff too.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll see like fungus gnats or something, be like, oh no, I'm probably overwatering some of my stuff here. So got to keep an eye on that moisture level. Ken, do fungus gnats do anything to seedlings? They don't. They're just annoying, right?
They're feeding on organic matter. I think sometimes they may feed on roots. And I guess if you have a really big population, um, they may do some damage. But in my experience with starting seeds, I usually get some every year. I think they're usually eating more of the organic matter, that the crud that's growing on top, but they could potentially feed on the roots too.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's another problem you can run into.
Yeah.
Is fungus gnats.
So, and is that something where you could you restrict your watering? I guess if it's really bad, you just have to dump everything um, and start over. Or if it's nice enough outside, you probably just move stuff outside and let nature take its course. And because I'm sure that they would be able to disperse in more of a outdoor setting as opposed to being locked up inside.
Yeah, and cutting back on your watering. And I mean, it'll take some time for those to disperse. You get it in your house plants too, kind of the same idea. Cut
Mhm.
down the watering, let it dry out a little more. A little trickier with seedlings. They're not quite as tolerant of really dry conditions as a larger, a little more established plant. When we get them, we get the yellow sticky cards. So just yellow cards. They've got glue on either side and hang those up, and we kind of trap them out, trap the adults out. Doesn't really do anything about the larvae in the soil, but if you leave those out, you can kind of reduce the adult population so they're not laying as many eggs and stuff.
Yeah, not buzzing around you all the time if
Yeah.
you're sitting next to your house plants. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, one maybe last one issue we'll talk about is is the case of as you're watering, sometimes we get this film develop on the surface of our flats or of our potting mix. It looks like algae. Um, in a lot of times, I think you see this often, kind of going back to this idea of potting mixes that have a really high fertilizer nutrition content. It just kind of overstimulates the growth of algae and other fungal type organisms, other microorganisms. Just overstimulates them. You just get this flush of growth because you're creating pretty nice environment for them. Consistently wet environment, light, maybe not as much air movement, and you get this algae growth on your potting mix. I've never really done anything about it. Ken, have you ever really done? Have you gotten this, and did you do anything about it?
Yeah, this is probably our biggest issue every year is that algae growth. Because I probably leave my plants a little wetter than I probably should, but I'd rather have them a little more on the wet side than drying off and
Mhm.
starting to wilt. I mean, especially when they're real small. When they get bigger, I really start cutting back on the water. What I do is I'll sprinkle vermiculite over all of my plants. When I do that, kind of help prevent a little bit of that light getting there. And vermiculite, there's no nutrients or anything like that either. So that'll keep it down for a good amount of time. Every once in a while, I'll get it, especially if I'm top watering. That kind of gets mixed up and it'll come in. But it does a pretty good job of at least delaying it, if not stopping it almost altogether.
Good tip. I love that. So a nice top dressing of vermiculite to keep the algae from growing on top. That's a good tip. I'm making notes. Lots of good tips today.
So works for me. Hopefully, if other people do it, it works for them.
Mhm.
And you can get big old bags of that, and it's not terribly expensive. And if that's all you're using it for, it'll last you for a good long time.
Yeah. And it's you can get the horticultural grade vermiculite and don't need to worry about it anymore, folks. It no longer contains asbestos as it did in previous generations, not ours, fortunately. So yes, that's now regulated.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, that was a lot of great information about starting our own seeds, getting up on that first leg of the marathon that is the growing season. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by Ken Johnson. A special thank you to Ken for being with us here this week, chatting about seed starting. Ken, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And I forgot to mention this earlier. So you did mention that people are oftentimes wondering when they should start seeds. We do have an article that we did on that. It was last year, talking about vegetables and flowers. Not all flowers, but some flowers. So we can link to that in the show notes if you're curious about when you should be starting stuff. And thank you, and good luck on your seed starting journey this year.
if it ever gets started. Yes. First, you got to start seed starting. Yeah.
And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We're going to be talking about perennial vegetables that you only need to plant once and they just keep coming back over and over again. So no need for seed starting. It should be a fun, exciting show. I love it when vegetables just pop right back up and I don't have to do anything. So listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.